Never mind. Now, let's see that Keyblade.
What? There's no way you're getting this.
Alright, then have it your way.
Final Fantasy has always been this really weird series to me. In terms of, I respect it, and I know it has a big history in the JRPG genre, and in Japan as a whole, right? I know it's a big deal. And yet, growing up, I never really got into it right away. And I wonder if other people have this experience as well. Because I usually grew up playing a lot of platformers. JRPGs always felt like this weird commitment. Usually didn't have any voice acting. It just felt like, as a kid, I wasn't sure if I was going to be engaged in it that long to understand the mechanics and how it works and really appreciate it. Which, ironically enough, the JRPG genre, the first one, because I remember, and I've always said this constantly on streams, there was a time when I was younger and I saw somebody play Final Fantasy VII in the room. It wasn't me playing it, but I was spectating and watching them. I didn't understand what was going on, to be honest, right? Like I saw all of these numbers and I thought, oh, 59 damage on that one hit, that's good, right? And then I see him do another one and it's like, oh wait, that did 89? Is that good? Are you winning? Because back then, there wasn't any health bars or anything, right? It was just, you had to keep smacking them until they went down. And it was just information that the player didn't know. So as a kid, I found it all incredibly confusing, and it felt like things just took long to do. As opposed to, when I played other games, it's like, bam, you see enemy, just jump on them, it's done, go over, keep progressing, right? Like, especially with platformers and all that kind of stuff. It's weird. Final Fantasy, when I think of it, I just remember that little moment, right? I just remember when I was younger and I couldn't get into it. I didn't get into JRPGs until a bit later when I was around 5 or 6. And I played Paper Mario on the N64. That was a fantastic introduction to the genre, in my opinion, just because as a kid, it had the low numbers game. The badge system was an easy way to worry about equipment instead of having all your gear with your headpieces and accessories and all that. It was simple. It was very easy to get into it at that young age and kind of understand what all the other games in the genre were going for. So that game deserves a lot of credit, in my opinion at least. It deserves a lot of credit for introducing me to the genre in the first place. I didn't really know about Square Enix, or back in the day Squaresoft, until Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, not Kingdom Hearts 1. I can imagine a lot of people were expecting Kingdom Hearts 1. No, I actually started with Chain of Memories on Game Boy Advance because my sister ended up getting it as, I'm not sure if it was a birthday present or if it was for some other occasion, but basically we ended up seeing the commercial for Chain of Memories on Game Boy Advance, and we ended up saying, yo, we gotta get this. So we ended up getting it. It was a pretty cool time. I actually still, enjoy that Game Boy Advance game. We'll, at some point maybe I'd like to make a proper video talking about my thoughts on that game. But, needless to say, played Chain of Memories, then I found out that there were other games on the PS2. I was like, whoa, what is going on? Got into Kingdom Hearts 2 and Kingdom Hearts 1. Great games in their own right. But the Kingdom Hearts series, as most people know, was a crossover between Square and Disney. So it ended up being Disney and Final Fantasy. Man, I had no idea what was going on, right? I didn't know about Squall or Leon or however you want to call it, I didn't know about him or Cloud or Sephiroth or any of these other characters like Yuffie. And man, it's so funny looking back because I just didn't know. I didn't know Final Fantasy like that back then. But Kingdom Hearts was the way that I got introduced, and everybody was pretty cool, compared to Sora, who was Sora's kind of very much like an underdog in Kingdom Hearts 1, right? So everyone else looks like these like mature, experienced people that know exactly what's going on in the world. When you don't, when you're starting off the game, you feel absolutely clueless. I really enjoyed those characters, especially the Colosseum fights. My god, that stuff was pretty cool. But yeah, then afterwards I ended up getting into Final Fantasy, weirdly enough, through Super Mario RPG. Like, in a way, it's like all of these things keep making sense, right? I start the genre with Paper Mario, then I go to Kingdom Hearts to know what Final Fantasy is a little bit, and then I play Super Mario RPG, granted through emulation, right? But I still played it, still played the whole thing, right? And I got to this really dope secret boss against Kulex, which I still don't actually know where he's from or if he was like an original creation. I'll probably add in a note somewhere in the video just to like clarify, because I did not do any research. I'm rambling. Did that fight. I heard this really awesome music that wasn't in the game at all, and it was apparently the battle theme from Final Fantasy II, or really Final Fantasy IV in Japan. It was 2 in the West. It's confusing. I'm not going to get into that here. Don't worry about it. I just, I bring it up because a lot of people know it like that in the West. But it was basically a rendition of that battle theme in that game, which was really cool. And I was like, oh man, this led to like this weird rabbit hole where it's like, you ever get so fascinated by something that you just want to know more, right? I'm sure we've all been there. So that's kind of what happened to me, where I ended up looking up, okay, let me hear the original. Let me do a little bit of compare and contrast. I was like, oh, this is from Final Fantasy II on Super Nintendo, huh? Alright. Well, I just finished emulating that one. Let me just, let me check this one out. And, oh my god, like, that's all it took. That's all it took for me to just get into Final Fantasy. Like, Final Fantasy II is, well, I'll just call it Final Fantasy IV. I don't know. I don't know which one to use to avoid confusion. I'll just say 4, because Western fans might still call it 2. I'd imagine there's some old heads out there, But, yeah, Final Fantasy IV. So, that was the first time I played Final Fantasy, thanks to playing Mario RPGs leading into that. How weird, right? But, yeah, played that one and finished it through. I gotta say, the first few moments of Final Fantasy IV are pretty great. Something about the music, the way it sets itself up with this like whole betrayal arc and the story of like redemption with a lot of these characters, it's done really well. And I was surprised at how hooked I got. Like, granted, the music helped as well. The music was fantastic, whether it's like the battle theme, the boss theme, overworld, right? Even like smaller incidental ones like Rose's theme, or like the theme of love, if you will. Just all of that stuff, man. It made that game really cool and really fun for me to just want to keep going and see what's going to happen. And it wasn't the most engaging story, right? Like, it's not Shakespeare or nothing, but it was fun. It was a really fun time, and I still have very fond memories of Final Fantasy IV. It didn't really stick, though, right? Like, I thought of it as like its own thing, and it was enjoyable, but like, I tried checking out Final Fantasy III or 6, afterwards, and I don't know. Like, it wasn't anything about the game was bad. The music was great. The game visually looked better. But, I think there was this thing, and it's still, like, true today, to be fair. I still think it's true, at least, where I feel like for JRPGs, I have to be in a certain mood for them, just because they are that much of a commitment. And I knew Final Fantasy III was longer, or rather, Final Fantasy VI. I knew Final Fantasy VI was going to be longer than 4, so I don't know. I kind of bailed out after a few hours. Like, I thought it was good, but I just didn't get into it as much. Like, maybe it's just because I didn't know where the story was going immediately, quite like how Final Fantasy IV set it up right off the bat. It was a more simpler story, but Final Fantasy VI takes its time a bit more, I feel. At least from first impressions, right? I could be wrong. I actually have yet to properly play that game and experience it. So at some point I would like to. I know the Pixel Remaster came out recently, and we'll get into that in a sec. But yeah, to not make this take longer than it needs to, so my history with Final Fantasy, right? I started with 4, played a bit of 6, but then bailed out, played halfway through 7, and then bailed out. Again, probably because I got distracted with something else, or maybe I just realized, oh wait, this game is long, right? And maybe just like dipped. Who knows? It's been a while. It's been over a decade since those times. I played about halfway through 7, and then ended up watching the rest through like a playthrough on YouTube. Because back in the day, man, that was a thing that was kind of common. At least for me, I don't really watch playthroughs anymore. I'd rather experience the games. But nevertheless, you know, I know most of the plot points of Final Fantasy VII, although I would like to play it again proper. Final Fantasy VIII, I've never touched. I've heard some people like it, some people dislike it. So, I've just heard some opinions, but I've never made my own, right? Same thing goes for Final Fantasy IX. I actually don't know much about Final Fantasy IX, and I intend to keep it that way because I've heard it's really good. Just like I've heard it's one of like the last good ones, debatably, unless you count Final Fantasy X. But that is one that I want to properly experience myself at some point. So 9 I've heard is good, haven't played it. 10 I did own on PS2, but unfortunately had the same fate as Final Fantasy VII, where I got a good few hours in. I must have put in at least 20 hours, and then just stopped because I was busy with other things. That was actually around the time when I was in high school, so which was super late into getting like Final Fantasy X on PS2. By the way, that was probably around, oh, I don't know, 2010, right? Like I got a cheap copy on PS2. I was late to the party anyway, but I just didn't get into it as much as I wanted to. But it was good for what it was. It's just, I think it was that contrast with playing the Kingdom Hearts games already and seeing how good the presentation got in those games, and not realizing that Final Fantasy X was a launch title for PS2, which in that context, it's visually impressive and really cool, but it just didn't hook me as much as I wanted. And again, that's Final Fantasy X, from what I remember and from what I hear from people, that's another game that really takes its time to let that pot simmer, right? Let that thing build up some steam, and then the lid just goes completely off track, right? Then it's just everywhere. It just blows up. It's insane. I've heard Final Fantasy X is really good at setting it up just to, you know, kind of blow some minds. So, yeah, I really want to play Final Fantasy X proper at some point. But Final Fantasy XI, never touched. Same thing with 12. 13, I haven't touched. 13's writing from afar just looked like the kind that I would not enjoy. Like, the banter didn't seem the way that I would enjoy it, but I don't know. It's making these like calls from like, you know, again, other opinions or other things that people say is like wrong about them, and that's kind of rough. I wouldn't say no to giving 13 a fair chance at some point, but as you can see, there's a lot of Final Fantasy games I could pick from because I don't have that much experience. 14, we'll get to it. That's the whole point of this video. I swear. Although now I'm just rambling about my Final Fantasy experience, which, you know, is still valid, but yeah, 14, I played a little bit in 2016 in June. You know what? Let's put a pin on that. Let's put a pin in it and then come back to it, because it's the whole point of this. So I just realized midway through talking about this, because it's unscripted, let's put a pin on that and come back to it, right? So Final Fantasy XV came out, and I actually bought it day one, because that was around the time when I was following E3 news and stuff, and that was when I was looking into the history of the game and like the anticipation that a lot of people were looking forward to this one. And while the release is certainly mixed and certainly has issues, do not get me wrong, I think because I didn't know of the history of Versus 13 and like having to wait for something that came out and was just an okay experience, Personally, I felt I didn't get burned, right? In that sense, where it's just like, the anticipation didn't matter to me because I wasn't part of it. And I didn't know about it. So, 15 came out. It was an enjoyable time for what it was. I liked the characters, at least, especially, the 4 main characters at least. I think the way it handled its story and execution was a little rough. But the parts that I enjoyed, I really did enjoy. So it really is a good example of a mixed bag experience, right? There was some good stuff in it, but there was certainly some bad. And at some point, I'd like to make a proper video on Final Fantasy XV, but it's too much to go into right now. But I played 15 and I enjoyed it. Oh wait, I started from 4. Right, so the only other one, I have never played Final Fantasy 2 or 5, but I did play the DS remake of Final Fantasy III. I actually own the copy of it. And once again, kind of fell for that curse. And maybe it's just my attention span more than a curse, right? Who knows? Got about halfway through. It just wasn't hooking me. And I kind of just said, no, I'm good. I didn't like how, the magic system was, handled. I didn't like how certain things were just, gimmicks in dungeons, which was, and now with the context of, when it was done in, on NES, I can kind of see what they were trying to go for. The DS remake just, it was alright. I traded it in, I won't lie. Back when I foolishly traded stuff into GameStop. Ooh boy. But yeah, ended up doing that. Final Fantasy I, actually, I played, in a way, this is a good segue, trust me. So, Final Fantasy I did play recently, fairly recently, like a week ago. Basically finished it, because my sis and I, or rather my sis wanted to spectate me playing Final Fantasy I Pixel Remaster. And we were, well, the intent was to play it because I'm probably butchering the name order, because there's two titles in one, so I apologize if I'm butchering it. But Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is coming out later this month. I want to say on the 18th? So I thought, well, hey, this is a retelling, kinda, sort of, of Final Fantasy I. So let me see what this is all about. Let me do my homework. Let me see what it's, taking. What are the bits and pieces, and what is it adapting and taking away from the proper game that the story is based on, which is Final Fantasy I. And I recently played the Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster and really enjoyed revisiting that game. So I thought, let me check out one. Now is a pretty good time. The Pixel Remasters are not perfect, but they are great ways to casually play those games where you get an insane amount of money, you can auto battle to make things faster, right? It's some really nice quality of life features, and the music is great. Anyway, so Final Fantasy I Pixel Remaster, ended up streaming it, right? Had a pretty good time. And oh boy. Oh my god. I almost feel like I did a disservice to that game. Not that I didn't enjoy it, I was really enjoying it for what it was, along with some of the limitations that it had for being the first game in the series back, way back in the 80s. And long story short, because my sister was there, and I know her biggest point of reference for the Final Fantasy games was Final Fantasy XIV, because she's the one that played it a lot more than me at this point. Basically, along with my good friend Brace Your Soul and Vex and a few other people in the chat, basically playing Final Fantasy I, whenever we were doing one of those sessions on stream, it ended up devolving really quickly into tangents about Final Fantasy XIV. Man, we're at the fucking end credits of Final Fantasy I, and we're talking about Final Fantasy XIV. Oh my...
I'm so sorry!
It's my fault too, damn, this is what happens, bro. When I plan ahead and I'm like, what am I gonna do next? And so I'm 14, I'm like, fuck. And to be fair, it's because Final Fantasy I is a very simple game. You go from dungeon to dungeon. It's a very linear, well, kind of linear. There's some overworld map exploration and a few side things you can do. But for the most part, it's pretty much point A to point B, the game. and the pixel remaster made fighting a lot easier, you know, along with getting money, so you could just steamroll through a lot of it. So there just wasn't much to say on commentary. So I ended up still thinking, well, hey, let me talk about Final Fantasy adjacent stuff. Even if it's not 1, it's talking about 14. And ended up talking about how, like, you know, if I went back to it, you know, what I would do, or maybe what to avoid, or like, you know, oh, I've heard it's gotten really good. And of course, I've heard all the memes of like the free trial with, you know, with, you know, getting up to level 60, including the expansion Heavensward and all, you know, you've heard the copy paste, critically acclaimed, yada yada, right? And I find it funny, right? I find it funny just because it's great to hear that it's gone really great, but for me, I already tried Final Fantasy XIV. So Final Fantasy XIV is a bit of a weird one for me, mainly for the simple fact that I played it back in June of 2016. I think I played it for about 2 or 3 days, because basically my sister and I were thinking of, you know, ways to spend time together or do stuff, or maybe because I wanted to get into what she was into, right? Like, just have another way to bond and spend time together. And yeah, I heard 14 was pretty popular even back then, so I thought, well, let me give this a shot, you know. I don't really play MMOs, so we'll see how it goes. And man, okay, so let me get off on a slight tangent. It's funny. So at some point here, there's probably going to be some really, really rough footage. I apologize about the bitrate. Maybe it's playing right now. I don't know. But yeah, apologies for the rough video you might be seeing. This is actually the pretty much only archived footage I saw of back when I streamed back in 2016. I think I did 2 sessions, but thank God. Okay, the one thing I'm gonna say is thank God I can just put music over this stuff, because holy crap, it's a miracle anybody bothered to watch my streams back then. I had the AC on constantly, but I had like a noise gate up, so it's just like it was in and out, like AC noise blaring along with commentary, and it's just very, very distracting to hear. I do not like it. Maybe that's just me, but man, some people have better tolerance for it than I do. Regardless, I found some things kind of interesting about watching through that footage. That one in particular was basically the last session I ever did live of Final Fantasy XIV back in 2016. And I think all throughout I couldn't... Streaming in some ways kind of ruined the experience. And not necessarily streaming in and of itself, but mainly how I worried about the views and, like, you know, an active chat and things. Granted, I don't do it to get any sort of presence there, right? But it still is rough if you don't see a chat, like, actively engaging with what you're doing, you know? Like, even if it's just 1 or 2 people, but they're active in the chat and talking about it, that's usually all I need. Final Fantasy XIV, when I remember it, I remember basically, and I'm probably gonna butcher the name, I'll get used to it with time, Ulda, right? I don't know. Maybe it's Ulda. I don't know. Let me know. But I remember that starting area because I went with Pugilist because I liked Monk, and I have a big bias towards martial arts in any game, right? Like, I love fighting games, but I also love it in JRPGs too, like, as well. Or rather, I like it in JRPGs too, where someone can just throw hands and not have to worry about their armor or a sword. It's like, man, screw that nonsense. Like, their body is the weapon, and that, I always found that incredibly sick. I started with Pugilist in that starting town, and it's so weird to hear people on Twitter talk about how, like, oh man, the story is fantastic, it's great, like, it made me feel so many emotions, and, like, you know, I can't think of a better game that's out right now than Final Fantasy XIV. And I'm really, really happy for those people, because it's just like, I want to experience that. I want to. It's just, it always looked like such a big mountain and such a big commitment, right? I just don't know when I'd have the time. But long story short, back in 2016, my sister wrote me into it, and I went in with no guide, no real friends to help me. My sister kind of helped me a little bit, you know, like, God bless her, she was trying her best. Nothing in the game really hooked me. Nothing really seemed interesting. And again, this is from the perspective of someone who does not play MMOs. It just, when I think of Final Fantasy XIV, I think of exactly what's on the footage here, albeit despite the rough bitrate. I think of the boring starting town, a lot of muted colors, a lot of brown. I remember having to remember to sprint, and you know, just all these little things where it's just like I just was doing random side quests, which, again, I've heard that they've improved and made better nowadays, where you don't really have to worry about side quests or certain things, and it's like now you can just do the main quests and you'll get enough experience to go through the game with your starting class. And I'm like, that's great. I heard about that, like, I think a couple years ago. I was like, okay, that's really good incentive. Again, like, there were these little updates I've heard about throughout the years where it's like, okay, Final Fantasy XIV is getting to where I want it to be, in terms of, like, the casual perspective for me, like, to even consider returning. Basically, it was all this stuff. It was just, like, the starting area not really hooking me, not really getting a feel for the combat or what I'm supposed to do, because, again, I had no guide. I was absolutely clueless. I got bored, you know? Like, it just felt like busy work. And then, you know, just nobody's really in the chat. And it's just like, what is the point, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. And it's so funny too, because I think at the end of this footage, I half joke and say never again. Or, like, you know, something along the lines of, like, I'm not streaming this again. Yeah, man, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna...
It was that shiz.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn off the stream. It is completely dead. Good lord. Never again. Because it was like, that entire session, I was having that realization where I was like, you know, do people enjoy watching MMOs on stream? Or I was just thinking, I was trying to rationalize why no one was there. And I thought, like, do people actually, you know, do they show up for this stuff? And man, if I could just tell past me, dude, don't worry about it, just enjoy the game, I would have. Because nowadays, that's what I do. Even if a game that I play doesn't have a lot of viewers, I turned off the viewer count, right? I don't even know. I purposely hide that stuff now, so I'm always active on commentary, I'm always engaged with the game, or I'm always talking about something, just because you never know who is watching. It could be someone that, you know, isn't really there, but is still appreciating you, putting you on in the background or something, or who knows what. Long story short, I'm not talking about Twitch, I'm talking about Final Fantasy XIV. But long story short, I tried it a little bit. I even bought, like, the collector's edition, like, digital stuff that you get from, like, the Mog Shop or Mognet. I forget which one, sorry. I'm just going off of memories. But yeah, I ended up getting, like, you know, some of those goodies, and yeah, just didn't really stick with 14. It's not that it was a bad game. I think it's just that I wasn't in the mood for a MMO, but I wanted to, you know, hang out with my sister, and she really wanted me to get into it, you know? And I just couldn't. And it was also that fear of, like, you know, paying monthly for something and not getting my money's worth if I wasn't going to engage with it. It was also the fact that you know, I think for a lot of people that struggle with this too, is that kind of play all kinds of games. You get distracted easily by, like, other things coming out in the year. So I think around that time Final Fantasy XV was about to come out, and then I got distracted with that, ironically, which a lot of people would say 14 is the better game, and I'm going to be in that same boat too soon. But yeah, all that to say that that's kind of been my experience with the series with Final Fantasy and 14, where it's just like, I just remember not being interested in it. But then I keep hearing it's really good. I keep hearing it's really, really, really good. So then my excuse ended up being, okay, well, as great as it is, I don't know when I'd have the time to really put into it. You know, just because, like, there was other stuff coming out. And it's like, honestly, I've kind of just said screw it. Screw that mentality. I keep seeing my other friends and like my little circle as well also getting into 14, and I'm like, you know what? This would be a great way to spend time with them. This would be a good way for me to properly, you know, have fun, experience that story, see what it's all about, maybe learn some things the hard way, because I've tried looking up a little bit of information, but oh boy, there are just some things I'm just gonna have to do when I start, you know? So the other big reason, I won't lie, is because of Phantasy Star Online 2, and it's mainly because I played that back in 2020, had a really good time with it, despite the rough beginner traps and like, you know, what not to do and avoid. I just loved it for the Sega fan service and how charming the world was. And the mission structure was like Monster Hunter with like a team of 4 people, so it was really easy to get into and I really enjoyed it for what it was. But, you know, long story short, was looking forward to New Genesis, and New Genesis last year didn't quite hit the mark. If I'm being 100% honest, it was my most disappointing game of last year. Just because I can't stress how much I was really looking forward to it after playing the beta. I saw so much potential. I saw ways for it to improve. It's just been going at a snail's pace. I want to love that game. I really do. To put it into perspective, I've had that game installed on my PC for all those months, and now is basically when I'm going to uninstall it to install Final Fantasy XIV. And that's not like some sort of symbolic thing or anything, it's just I don't have enough space on my hard drive for both games, right? Or rather, solid state drive. There's just not enough room. Right. So it's just weird, you know, it almost feels bittersweet, where it's just like, I'm about to start Final Fantasy XIV, and I guess I'll wait till New Genesis gets better. I want to support that game way more, but it just wasn't where it needed to be, and it still isn't. It's added a new location and a few other, like, you know, quest lines, but compared to where PSO2 Global was, which was an accelerated rate to get the game for Western fans, it just feels like such a step back. But, you know, nevertheless, I still want to support people in that community, and I hope people keep enjoying that game, and I'll be there when it gets really good. I'll definitely be there. All that to say that tomorrow, or I guess at the time of uploading this, today... Whoa. Okay, future Marcos here, let me stop this. So, it is 4:30 in the morning, I'm still in the middle of editing this, and I'm just going to stop and call it a night and install the game, because, yeah, I grossly underestimated how long this would take when I'm still not used to editing. So yeah, disregard this whole point about, like, you know, streaming on the first day. It probably already happened, and I'm working on editing a compilation of sorts. I'll be starting my journey through Final Fantasy XIV. And I'm excited, though I also don't expect the first day to be, like, you know, really engaging, because it's gonna be tutorials, gonna be a lot of prompts, right? But I'm looking forward to it, you know? This has always been the biggest, like, anomaly where it's just like, I want to be a part of this community as well. I want to see what it's about, why people love it so much, and maybe I can spot a few references and enjoy, you know, similar to Sega with PSO2, enjoy the fan service that is there. Like, and I mean true fan service, where it's just like, oh, if you've kept up with the series and you're a fan of it, there's going to be a lot to love, there's going to be a lot of things to learn, and just appreciate, you know, as I play. It's like the sickest museum, but in, like, video game form, right? Like, that's kind of neat when you think about it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to try to do stuff like this where I'm kind of talking about my journey through it. So we'll see what happens. Regardless, if you want to tune into that, that'll be over on twitch.tv/XenoMarcos, same name, you know, as my YouTube channel. I'll be streaming Final Fantasy XIV on that day, and like, you know, a few more days in between. There's not really a set schedule, you know. If there is one, I'll keep you guys posted. But yeah, just wanted to start that, wanted to see what it's all about, and I'm looking forward to it. So here's hoping. And just to get a real sense of perspective, I'm actually going to go in with Pugilist again. I just want to remember what that was like. You know, I want to do it again just to see. It's been over 5 years. So what better way to see how things have changed from that initial first impression than starting off the exact same way, right? In the same starting area, but now with a new perspective on streaming and showing it off, and a different Final Fantasy XIV, a better Final Fantasy XIV, right? Where I don't have to worry about as many side quests, and I can just enjoy the story at a proper pace, you know, a good pace, a better pace. So yeah, I just wanted to make this as I guess day 0 technically, where this is basically the night where I'm about to install the game. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Here's hoping I don't I don't know. I almost wonder what mistakes will happen, but we'll see. Either way, if anybody's watching this and wants to tune in, you know, I'll be on Twitch. Feel free to say hi. And if you want, you know, join me on this journey together, because I have a feeling this is going to be a big one. I don't even really know truly what to expect, but I expect some surprises and some things that are going to either make me very salty or very hyped and excited to, like, you know, be a part of it. So yeah, keep you guys posted on the journey, you know, and maybe do some highlights of stream moments and some reactions. We'll see. I'm thinking about what to do as I'm doing all of this, but right now I just wanted to get this one out. So yeah, there's a brief Final Fantasy retrospective, and you know, a few tangents here and there, but I just want people to understand what the lead-in is to all this, which weirdly was Final Fantasy 1 Pixel Remastered, and talking to my friends about 14 while I was playing it. For some reason, Final Fantasy 1 was the reason I ended up talking about interest in Final Fantasy 14 again. That is so weird. I guess it kind of makes sense a little, but man, what a way. But anyway, wherever you are, whatever time it is, hope you guys have a good rest of your day, night, and I'll see you around. Have a good one, and take care, everybody. Later.